A sharp, ugly crack, followed by a child's stunned, sharp gasp, and then the sound of a single, furious adult voice slicing through the humid afternoon air. That was the precise, irrevocable instant that Linda Caraway, self-declared and undisputed ruler of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, lost absolutely everything she thought she owned, everything she had meticulously, ruthlessly built. In her mind, a fortress of bylaws and regulations protected her. She believed she was performing a necessary, if unpleasant, duty, putting some loud, disrespectful inner-city brat in his place for having the sheer audacity to let his bicycle wheels whisper across the edge of her perfectly manicured, chemically treated lawn. She was the queen of this suburban castle, and the grass was her sacred, emerald green moat. What she couldn't possibly have known, what her narrow worldview could never have conceived, was that the boy's father, a man she'd only ever seen in passing, a quiet figure leaving at dawn in a dark, nondescript sedan, started his day not with coffee, but by signing federal warrants that could reroute the course of international events. She had no idea that the slap she'd just delivered would echo far beyond the quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac, reaching the highest echelons of federal power before the sun had even set. Stick around, because the story of what happened over the next few minutes, and the days that followed, spirals from a moment of breathtaking ugliness into a reckoning that is almost too stunning to be believed. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the brutal collision of two Americas, all on a single patch of grass. Section 1, The Calm Before the Crown. I moved into Willow Creek Estates 6 years ago, back when the neighborhood still had that fresh paint and new sod smell. The welcome signs at the entrance were crisp, the wood chips in the playground were plentiful, and the sense of community felt genuine. I've lived here long enough to watch those same welcome signs warp and curl at the edges, their cheerful fonts slowly peeling away like a sunburn, mirroring the decay of the neighborhood spirit. The catalyst for this slow-motion decline was Linda Caraway. Linda didn't just become the HOA president, she seized the position. It was during a sparsely attended Tuesday night meeting in the community clubhouse 3 years back. Most of us were busy with dinner, homework, or just the general exhaustion of life. Only a handful of retirees were present. Linda, then just the treasurer, staged what could only be described as a procedural coup. She called for a snap election to replace the previous president, a mild-mannered accountant named Gary who was resigning due to a job transfer. Before anyone could so much as check the bylaws, Linda had nominated herself, seconded the motion through a proxy, and rammed the vote through. She snatched the HOA gavel as if it were a limited edition Fabergé, a prize she had long coveted and finally captured. The changes started subtly, then escalated with unnerving speed. First came the infamous trash can mandate. An email, dripping with passive-aggressive pleasantries, announced a new bylaw. All trash and recycling bins had to be retrieved from the curb and stored out of sight by 8:02 a.m. the morning after pickup. Not 8 o'clock, not 8:05. 8:02, a $10 fine would be levied for each violation. We thought it was a joke, a typo. It wasn't. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow on my street, was the first victim. She was a little slow-moving in the mornings and got to her can at 8:07. The next day, a crisp white envelope containing a fine notice was taped to her front door. Soon, our inboxes were flooded with Linda's digital decrees. They were miniature masterpieces of condescension, always starting with a cheerful, "Greetings, neighbors," before descending into a thicket of jargon about protecting property values, maintaining community standards, and preserving the aesthetic integrity of Willow Creek. These phrases were, we quickly learned, code. Protecting property values meant no basketball hoops could be left out overnight. Maintaining community standards meant your garden gnomes had to be pre-approved by the newly formed Architectural Review Committee, which consisted of Linda and her reflection. Aesthetic integrity meant your kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk were an eyesore to be power-washed away by nightfall. She had an almost supernatural ability to spot violations. A satellite dish angled 2 degrees outside the approved range. Holiday decorations left up a day past the January 15th deadline. A faint oil stain on a driveway. Each infraction was documented with a time-stamped photo, a clinical, impersonal indictment of our perceived failings as homeowners. The emails were her primary weapon, each one a masterclass in veiled threats and sanctimonious judgment. "It has come to my attention," one began, "that certain residents are failing to appreciate the visual harmony we strive for. A child's brightly colored bicycle, for instance, is not a lawn ornament and should be stored in a garage, not left on the driveway where it clashes with the earth-tone palette of our homes." We grumbled. We complained to each other over fences and during hurried morning dog walks. We paid the fines, the late fees, the penalties for questioning the penalties. We told ourselves it was just the price of living in a nice neighborhood. It was easier to comply than to fight. We didn't yet realize that Linda's obsession with order wasn't about property values at all. It was about control. And beneath that control was a deep, bitter well of anger, a mean streak that we hadn't yet seen in its full, terrifying glory. We were just frogs in a pot, and Linda Carraway was methodically, patiently turning up the heat. Section 2, The Kid Who Rides Like Lightning. Malik Washington is 12 years old, and he's the kind of kid who seems to be powered by pure, unadulterated joy. He's got a smile that can disarm the grumpiest of mail carriers and a laugh so loud and uninhibited that the wind chimes on our porches seem to answer back. He's a whirlwind of scuffed knees, boundless energy, and quiet creativity. In his garage, he has a workshop of sorts, a corner where he welds together scrap wood ramps from discarded pallets and 2x4s, each one a monument to his ambition to achieve just a little more airtime on his BMX bike. He high-fives every dog on the street, knows them all by name, and carries a pocketful of treats just in case. He and his mom, Sarah, a kind and reserved nurse who works long shifts at the county hospital, moved in 2 summers ago. They came from the West Coast after his dad, Marcus, got reassigned. The neighborhood rumor mill, which usually runs on high-octane speculation, was surprisingly quiet about Marcus Washington. He was a ghost. A dark Chevy sedan would glide out of their driveway before the first sprinklers hissed to life and return long after most of us had settled in for the evening. He was tall, always impeccably dressed in a suit that seemed out of place in our casual suburban world, and he carried a heavy-looking briefcase. The consensus was that he was some kind of government bureaucrat or maybe a corporate lawyer who dealt with classified stuff. The kids on the block had a running joke that he was a spy, a theory fueled by his quiet demeanor and the serious, focused look he always wore. Nobody knew he worked out of Quantico, and nobody knew that his title wasn't Mr. but Director. Every afternoon, like clockwork, Malik would come home from school. His ritual was a burst of freedom that marked the end of the structured school day. He'd come bombing down Maple Crest Drive, the main artery of our little community, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He'd expertly pop the curb at the corner, his tires making a satisfying thump, and then coast the final 50 yards to his driveway, the setting sun glinting off his spokes. It was a fluid, graceful arc of motion, the physical expression of a kid simply happy to be home. Linda Carraway watched this daily pilgrimage with a simmering, proprietary rage. From behind the pristine, perfectly aligned slats of her plantation shutters, she would track his progress. To her, Malik wasn't a child celebrating his freedom. He was a disruption. His laughter was noise pollution. His bike was a potential weapon against her precious landscaping. He was, in her eyes, everything that didn't belong in her meticulously curated world. She watched him like a hawk watches a field mouse, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line, just waiting for him to make a mistake. She saw his very existence, his vibrant, carefree presence, as a personal affront, a daily violation of the sterile order she had imposed. He hadn't just uprooted her petunias in her mind, he had uprooted her sense of absolute control. That Tuesday was a monster. The air was thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of swamp-level humidity that you could wear. The sky was a hazy, washed-out gray, and the sun was a merciless, white-hot disk. Tempers across Willow Creek were already frayed thin. Lawns were wilting, air conditioners were groaning, and patience was a resource in critically short supply. It was the kind of day where a single misplaced word could ignite a firestorm. Around 4:15 p.m., Malik began his daily ride home. He came down Maple Crest, a little faster than usual perhaps, propelled by the promise of air conditioning and a cold drink. As he neared the corner of his street, he took the turn a little wide. For a split second, his front wheel skimmed the very edge of Linda Carraway's lawn, a brief, 2-foot kiss of rubber on grass. The flowers, her prize-winning petunias that she watered with what seemed like holy water, were a good 5 feet away, completely untouched. The grass itself was barely disturbed. It was a minor, fleeting transgression, the kind of thing that happens 1,000 times a day in any neighborhood where children play. But Linda, who had been tending to her rose bushes with surgical precision, saw it. Or rather, she felt it, like a seismic tremor in her soul. She dropped her shears and shot off her porch like a bottle rocket, her face a mask of incandescent rage. "Hey! You! Get back here right now!" She shrieked, her voice cutting through the thick air like a serrated knife. Malik, startled, squeezed his brakes, his back tire skidding on the asphalt with a sharp zip. He turned, his eyes wide with surprise. He knew the rules. He knew about Ms. Carraway. "I'm so sorry, Miss Carraway," he said, his voice genuine and apologetic. "My fault. I'll stick to the street next time, I promise." For a normal person, this would have been the end of it. An apology accepted, a lesson learned. But Linda was vibrating with a fury that had been building for months, if not years. Malik's bike, his race, his very presence, was the focal point for all her grievances. "Sorry doesn't uncrush my grass blades. Sorry doesn't bring delicate root systems back from the dead," she snapped, marching toward him, her sensible garden clogs thumping on the pavement. The absurdity of her words hung in the air, but she was beyond reason. The Ring camera on her neighbor's doorbell, now the most famous home security device in the country, captured what happened next in cold, unforgiving detail. The footage, which would soon loop endlessly on every news channel and social media feed, shows her grabbing his handlebars with a fierce, proprietary grip. Malik, caught off balance, wobbled. He tried to pull back, but her grip was like iron. "You people think you can do whatever you want," she snarled, her face just inches from his. And then she did it. She let go with one hand and landed a full, open-hand slap across his face. It wasn't a tap. It was a strike, filled with venom and force. The crack was sickeningly loud. The blow was so hard it knocked his baseball cap clean off his head, sending it spinning through the air like a discarded helicopter blade. Malik stumbled back, his hand flying to his stinging cheek, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. He was just a kid on a bike. He was on his own street. And an adult had just hit him. Tears welled up, hot and immediate. For a moment, there was only the sound of a distant lawnmower and Linda's heavy, triumphant breathing. Then, a single word, choked out between a sob and a gasp, that changed everything. Dad. Section 4, the name that flips the switch. Malik's dad isn't just any concerned parent. He isn't a corporate lawyer or a mid-level government accountant. He is Director Marcus Washington, the sitting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man who had been confirmed by the Senate and sworn into one of the most powerful law enforcement positions on the planet just 4 months prior. His is a world of classified briefings, counterterrorism strategies, and decisions that carry the weight of national security. That particular Tuesday, he had come home unusually early. He'd spent the morning in a classified hearing on Capitol Hill, a grueling session of testimony and pointed questions that left him mentally drained. He had slipped out of the city before the afternoon gridlock, trading the marble halls of Congress for the quiet, manicured streets of Willow Creek, a transition that always felt like entering a different dimension. He craved the mundane, the simple tasks that grounded him. He had changed out of his suit and was in the upstairs bathroom, tightening a loose faucet handle on his wife's sink, a small, tangible problem he could actually fix. It was then that the sound, the sharp, distinct crack of the slap, traveled through the open window, followed by his son's pained cry. A parent's ear is tuned to the unique frequency of their child's distress. Marcus Washington froze, wrench in hand. In that instant, the quiet suburban father receded, and the 30-year veteran of federal law enforcement took over. His senses went on high alert. He didn't run. He moved with a controlled, deliberate urgency that had been drilled into him over a lifetime of crisis management. By the time he stepped out his front door, his eyes scanning the scene with practiced speed, Linda Caraway had grabbed Malik again, her hand clamped onto his shoulder like a wheel lock on an impounded car. She was still lecturing him, her voice a low, furious hiss. Director Washington's presence altered the atmosphere of the cul-de-sac. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He walked calmly down his driveway, his stride measured and purposeful. The setting sun caught the glint of the small, gold enamel FBI badge he had clipped to his belt out of sheer habit, a piece of him he never fully took off. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was unnaturally calm, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of absolute authority that cut through Linda's tirade and stopped her cold. "Step away from my son." Linda turned, ready to unleash her venom on this new interloper, but the words died in her throat. She saw the man, the badge, the look in his eyes, a look that was not angry, but something far more terrifying, analytical, cold, and utterly unimpressed. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, mottled canvas of shock. Her carefully constructed world of petty rules and absolute dominance was crumbling in real time. I didn't know," she stammered, her hand falling from Malik's shoulder as if it had been burned. "He was on my lawn, I didn't know he was." Director Washington took another step forward, placing himself between Linda and his son. He gently put a hand on Malik's back, guiding him away. "You didn't know he was my son," he finished her sentence, his voice still level. "It wouldn't matter whose son he is." He paused, letting the silence hang in the humid air for a beat too long. But in the act of striking a child, intent, not ignorance, is what matters. And your intent was perfectly clear. Section 5, The Cavalry Shows Up. The suburban quiet was shattered not by a siren, but by the silent, coordinated arrival of professionals. Less than 5 minutes after Director Washington had placed a call, 3 black, unmarked SUVs, the kind you see in movies but never on your own street, glided into the cul-de-sac from different directions, boxing in Linda Caraway's property with quiet, menacing efficiency. They didn't speed, they simply appeared, their tinted windows revealing nothing of the occupants within. Doors opened in near unison, and 6 individuals, 4 men and 2 women, stepped out. They were dressed in functional, plain clothes, polos, slacks, practical shoes, but they moved with a synergy that screamed, federal agents. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, poured out of their houses. Front doors creaked open, garage doors rumbled up. Phones, suddenly appearing in every hand, were raised, their small red recording lights blinking in the fading sunlight. Mouths hung open. This was a scene from a television show, playing out next to their own bird baths and azalea bushes. Linda Caraway, who had been momentarily paralyzed by Director Washington's presence, seemed to reboot. Her programming kicked in, and she tried the classic pivot, the last refuge of the guilty, playing the victim. "He threatened me first," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Malik, who was now standing safely behind his father. "This boy, he was disrespectful. He was going to vandalize my property. I felt threatened." Call to action. If this story of justice and vindication had you cheering for Malik and the entire Willow Creek community, hit that like button, smash subscribe for more true stories of power and consequence, and ring that notification bell. We want to hear from you down below in the comments. Have you ever had to deal with an HOA tyrant who desperately needed a reality check? Share your stories of petty power trips and community pushback. The best and most unbelievable stories might just get featured in a future video. Takeaway. In the end, Linda Carraway made a fatal miscalculation. She thought real power lived in the fine print of HOA letterhead, in the threat of liens, and in the rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. She believed she could build a fortress out of bylaws and insulate herself from the world. What she found out, far too late, is that true power, the kind that endures, doesn't live in a rulebook. It lives in the sound of a 12-year-old's uninhibited laugh echoing down the block. It's found in the freedom of his bicycle wheels as he flies across the pavement, safe and secure, under a wide-open sky that was always meant to be shared by everyone.